SKOL Vikings, let's win this game.
Vikings fans, things are heating up in Minnesota. Get ready for this. There are serious trade talks involving one of the most explosive names on the defense. There is also a heated debate about bringing in help at a key offensive position. Right in the middle of all that, a roster decision is shaking up the locker room. And at the end of it all comes the kind of news nobody likes to hear. A veteran saying goodbye. Let's get started. Some news stories completely change the mood of an off-season, and this one definitely falls into that category. Over the last few days, a strong buzz has been spreading behind the scenes across the league. Multiple teams are making calls. Executives are asking about the price. And when half the NFL starts calling about the same player, you know something serious is happening. The conversation revolves around a piece who quickly became the engine of the defense, an explosive player, the type of guy who can change the rhythm of an entire drive with one pressure on the quarterback. At the same time, an important detail has surfaced. A trade could be on the table because of financial considerations and roster planning. Now hold on to this part. The name at the center of the story is Jonathan Greenard. Yes, the pass rusher who became one of the most dangerous weapons in Brian Flores' system could be on the trade radar. And this is not just quiet locker room chatter. According to several league reporters, the Vikings are already listening to offers. And this is where the story gets interesting. The same week these rumors started circulating, the NFL witnessed a massive trade. Max Crosby was dealt to the Baltimore Ravens, and it was not a small move. Baltimore sent 2 first-round draft picks to Las Vegas. That trade shifted the entire market, because when an elite pass rusher gets moved for 2 first-round picks, everyone immediately starts comparing production, age, and overall impact. That is when people started digging into the numbers. Since 2023, Crosby has played 44 games. He recorded 32 sacks, 128 solo tackles, 68 tackles for loss, and 114 quarterback pressures. Now take a look at Greenard's numbers during that same stretch. Also 44 games. 27.5 sacks, 96 solo tackles, 43 tackles for loss, 56 quarterback hits, and 96 pressures. So yes, there is a difference. Crosby is still the more established name, but Greenard's production is not as far off as many people expected. And there is another factor that matters here. Greenard is younger. That can completely change the conversation when front office executives start discussing trade value. Now comes the part that really hits the fans. The Vikings have reportedly been asking for a day 2 draft pick in return, something in the 2nd or 3rd round. But after the Crosby trade, many people believe Minnesota should raise that price. Because if Baltimore paid 2 first-round picks for a pass rusher, why should Minnesota accept less for a player who is also producing at a high level? This is where the dilemma comes in. Trading Greenard would open roughly $12 million in salary cap space. That would help reorganize the team's finances significantly, especially with so many roster decisions coming up. But at the same time, we are talking about the most explosive player on the defense. Losing that type of impact is never simple. Of course, there is a possible plan in place. Brian Flores would still be running the defense. And there is also Dallas Turner, a recent first-round draft pick who began showing serious development late last season. Even so, replacing immediate impact is never easy. So let me throw this question out to you. If a first-round pick appears in a trade offer, would you make that deal? I want to hear your take. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Because depending on how this situation develops, the Vikings defense could look very different in 2026. And honestly, the next story shifts the conversation to the other side of the ball, the position that always changes everything for a team. But before we move on, a quick request from one fan to another. Subscribe to the channel and leave your comment. The voice of the fans truly matters. There are moments when an entire franchise revolves around a single question, and right now that question is echoing throughout the Vikings building. Who is going to run the offense? Who will step onto the field as the starting quarterback when the season begins? Because while many people look at the roster and see talent spread across multiple positions, the truth is that the most important position in football is still surrounded by uncertainty. Over the last few days, an interesting scenario has started gaining traction. Instead of simply bringing in a proven veteran or handing everything over to a young quarterback, the idea being discussed is different. A move that could create a direct competition inside the roster itself. A true quarterback battle during training camp. And that is where the name appearing in trade projections enters the picture. Anthony Richardson. The quarterback who was selected 4th overall in the 2023 NFL Draft could become a trade target, and there is a proposal circulating among NFL analysts that connects his future directly with Minnesota. The concept is simple. The Vikings would send the 97th overall pick in the 2026 NFL Draft to the Indianapolis Colts in exchange for Richardson to compete for the job. Now, when you quickly glance at the numbers, it is easy to understand why this name creates debate. Across 3 seasons in the NFL, Richardson has started 15 games. His record as a starter is 8 wins and 7 losses. Nothing spectacular, but also far from disastrous. The issue appears somewhere else. Accuracy. He has completed only 50.6% of his passes so far in his career. That includes 2,400 passing yards, 11 touchdowns, and 13 interceptions. Those numbers make a lot of people skeptical, but there is another side to the story. Richardson is an extremely athletic quarterback. Running the football, he has already produced 634 rushing yards and 10 touchdowns. His average sits at 5.5 yards per carry, which is impressive for a quarterback. And there is one word that always appears when people discuss him: potential. A lot of potential. The reasoning behind this possible trade would be to create direct competition with J.J. McCarthy. No automatic starter, no early declaration before the season even begins. Both players would enter training camp knowing the starting job would be decided on the field. Kevin O'Connell has already shown multiple times that he enjoys developing quarterbacks, and there are people around the league who believe he could unlock far more from Richardson's game inside his offensive system. Another important factor is the contract. Richardson would carry a relatively small salary cap hit, roughly $5.3 million in 2026. In today's NFL quarterback market, that is practically a bargain, especially for a player who still has room to grow. Of course, there is risk involved. If Richardson does not develop as a passer, the team could end up simply replacing one problem with another. Even so, some people around the league see this scenario as very intriguing. One quarterback at 23 years old, another at 24. 2 young talents competing for the same job. The kind of quarterback competition that used to be common in the NFL. A real battle before the season even begins. And honestly, I can already picture that training camp storyline dominating headlines. Now hold on to this, because while some analysts are talking about bringing in a young quarterback to compete, there is another much bigger story building behind the scenes. One that could completely reshape the future of the most important position on the team. The quarterback position always creates an earthquake inside any NFL franchise, and the Vikings are no exception. Over the last few days, a comment made on national television sparked a serious debate among analysts, fans, and people who closely follow the inner workings of the league. The question that began circulating was simple but extremely delicate. Does the coaching staff truly believe in the young quarterback currently on the roster? Because when a team starts being linked to major names available on the market, it usually means there is some internal doubt. And that doubt has now started surfacing publicly. A veteran league executive offered a direct opinion during an interview that quickly gained attention. According to him, the feeling inside the organization may be that the original plan for the future of the offense is starting to shift. That is because the franchise is now emerging as a favorite to sign a former number 1 overall draft pick. The name at the center of that conversation is Kyler Murray. Yes, the former Arizona Cardinals quarterback, the 2019 Offensive Rookie of the Year, and a 2-time Pro Bowl selection, has suddenly become a very realistic possibility for Minnesota. And this is where the situation becomes fascinating. Murray was released by Arizona, but the Cardinals still owe him roughly $36 million in guaranteed money for the season. That means whichever team signs him could bring him in for a nearly symbolic deal. We are talking about a veteran minimum contract of around $1.3 million. In other words, very little financial risk. Now let's look at the player himself. Murray is 29 years old and should arrive fully rested for the upcoming season. He suffered a foot injury early last year and ended up missing the remainder of the campaign. The decision was made to protect his health. So when September arrives, he should be completely healthy. When you examine his career numbers, they are quite solid. More than 20,000 passing yards, 121 touchdown passes, and 60 interceptions with a completion rate of 67%. He has also always been a serious threat as a runner. He has produced more than 3,100 rushing yards and 32 rushing touchdowns during his career. Now we arrive at the point that directly affects the future of the roster. If Murray actually signs with Minnesota, it would completely change the dynamic of the quarterback room. Because a quarterback with that resume is rarely brought in to sit on the bench. That is where the conversation about J.J. McCarthy begins. The young quarterback still has 2 years remaining on his contract. He has started only 10 games so far and spent a significant amount of time dealing with injuries. There is still potential there, but the arrival of Murray would likely push McCarthy into the background. It would resemble a scenario seen many times across the league, where a young quarterback becomes a development project while a veteran takes control of the offense. Some analysts believe Minnesota should do exactly that because they see the roster as a team ready to compete right now. Others believe patience with McCarthy is the smarter approach. And honestly, this debate is far from settled, because if Kyler Murray ends up wearing purple and gold, the 2026 season could begin with one of the most intense quarterback discussions in the entire NFL. And here is the twist. While everyone debates quarterbacks and potential trades, the front office has also been making quieter roster decisions behind the scenes, moves that might seem smaller on paper but reveal a lot about how the team is preparing for the upcoming season. Not every offseason story arrives with a massive headline. Sometimes the move looks small, a contract extension here, a minimum deal there. But anyone who follows the day-to-day life of a football team knows those details also matter when building a competitive roster. That is exactly the type of decision the Vikings made recently. A quiet move, but an important one for the structure of the team. The front office chose to keep a player on the roster that many people outside Minnesota may barely notice, yet he appears on the field almost every time the special teams unit takes the field. That player is Bo Richter. The linebacker received an exclusive rights free agent contract, commonly known as an RFA tender. Essentially, this means the player cannot negotiate with other teams. The organization offers a league minimum contract, and the player remains on the roster. That is exactly what Minnesota decided to do. Richter is heading into his third season in the NFL. He is not yet a player who appears frequently in defensive highlight reels. But when you look at his work on special teams, his value becomes clear. Across his first 2 NFL seasons, he averaged 319 special teams snaps per year. That is a significant number. In the 2025 season alone, he played 372 special teams snaps. That represented 83% of all plays on that unit. In other words, almost every time the team lined up for a punt, kickoff, or return situation, he was out there. Players like that often go unnoticed when fans focus only on major defensive statistics, but inside the locker room and among the coaching staff, their value is enormous. Special teams decide games. A strong kickoff coverage can change field position. A well-executed block can save an entire drive, and players like Richter live for those responsibilities. He also saw limited action on defense. He played 52 defensive snaps last season and recorded 11 total tackles, 6 of them solo, along with 1 pass defended. Those are not eye-popping numbers, but they show he can contribute when called upon. And there is more happening behind the scenes with these roster decisions. The Vikings also placed a tender on defensive lineman Jalen Redmond, another player who recently carved out a role on the roster. Redmond had a strong season along the defensive line. He started 15 games in 2025 and finished the year with 6 sacks, 12 tackles for loss, 8 quarterback hits, 5 passes defended, and 1 forced fumble. Those numbers show he has evolved beyond being just a rotational piece. Another player expected to receive a similar contract is running back Xavier Scott. He was not a starter on offense, but he added depth at the position. Scott rushed for 114 yards with an average of 3.6 yards per carry. He also caught 14 passes for 98 yards and 1 touchdown. He also contributed significantly on special teams. All of this indicates a clear strategy from the organization. Keep depth players who already understand the system and can help stabilize the roster during the transition into the next season. Because when you look at the Vikings roster, more changes are clearly coming. Several cuts may still happen, and certain positions will require reinforcements. Having reliable depth players ready to step in may end up being more valuable than it appears. And speaking of roster changes, the next story is not about a contract and not about a trade. It is about a farewell. And when a respected veteran decides to step away from the game, it always resonates with those who follow the team closely. Some stories are simply part of the natural cycle of the NFL. Trades happen, signings happen, position battles happen. That is the nature of the sport. But there is one type of news that always feels heavier for those who follow a team closely. When a veteran decides it is time to walk away from the game. And that is exactly what just happened in Minnesota. The announcement came through a simple message posted on social media. A direct message without dramatic flair, but filled with meaning. The player opened his farewell with just 2 words: 10 seasons. After that, he thanked teammates, coaches, and family members. He reflected on the journey and spoke about always wanting to leave every place better than he found it. Then he closed the message with a calm goodbye. The player at the center of this moment is Ryan Kelly. The veteran center has officially announced his retirement from the NFL. For anyone who has followed professional football over the years, this is a name that carries serious respect across the league. Kelly was selected in the first round of the NFL draft and spent many seasons as a cornerstone of the Indianapolis Colts offensive line. He started 121 games for that franchise. Remarkable consistency. He arrived in Minnesota recently when the Vikings signed him during the 2025 free agency period to a 2-year contract worth $18 million. The plan was to strengthen the interior of the offensive line and provide more protection for the quarterback. But the season turned out to be difficult. Injuries began to pile up. Physical setbacks kept appearing. In the middle of all that came multiple concussions. 3 during the previous season alone. That is something no player can take lightly. Kelly is 32 years old and has already accomplished a great deal in his career. He earned 4 Pro Bowl selections and built a strong reputation across the league as a respected locker room leader. Eventually, the question stops being about football and becomes about health. During his lone season in Minnesota, he started 8 games. It was not the year he imagined when he signed with the team, but he still contributed to the group during his time there. The Vikings organization released a message shortly after the announcement congratulating Kelly on his career. The truth is that retirements like this are part of the sport, but they also highlight how the roster is undergoing a larger transformation. This is not the only change happening along the offensive line. Other players who were signed recently could also depart as the franchise reevaluates several pieces added during the previous offseason. Some expensive contracts are being reconsidered and certain roster experiments did not deliver the expected results. Now the front office must rebuild key areas of the roster, and when a respected veteran like Ryan Kelly walks away from the game, it symbolically marks the closing of a chapter. The offensive line will need new answers. The locker room loses an experienced leader, and the team enters another phase of adjustments as it tries to remain competitive. When you combine all the developments from the last few days, a possible defensive trade, major quarterback debates, roster restructuring, and now a significant retirement, it becomes clear that something larger is unfolding in Minnesota, and that leads directly to a reflection every fan who lives and breathes Vikings football is beginning to have. When you put all these stories together, it really feels like the Vikings are moving through one of those turning point moments in a franchise cycle. There is the potential trade involving Jonathan Greenard that could reshape the defense. There is a serious quarterback debate surrounding J.J. McCarthy, with Anthony Richardson emerging as a possible option and Kyler Murray entering the conversation as well. At the same time, the team is keeping players like Bo Richter to maintain stability within the roster. And then came the farewell of Ryan Kelly, a respected veteran who decided it was time to close this chapter of his career. All of it points to one very clear reality. Minnesota is adjusting the gears of this team. Some decisions will hurt, others could open new doors, but this moment will define a lot of what the next few seasons look like. Now I want to hear from you. Which story caught your attention the most? Stay tuned. SKOL Vikings, let's go!